the line item they never questioned. Every quarter, when the property management invoices cleared, when the insurance renewals went through without a single phone call, when the HOA fees on 3 separate addresses got paid before anyone even noticed the due dates, that was me. They thought it was automatic. They thought Dad had something up years ago that just kept running. They never asked, and I never told them. That's the thing about being invisible in a family. At some point, you stop correcting their assumptions. You let them believe the machine runs itself. My name is Wren. I'm 31 years old, and for the past 6 years I have been the silent operating partner behind a real estate holding company that my in-laws believe belongs entirely to my husband's family trust. It doesn't. It never did. My mother-in-law, Connie, has a way of walking into a room that makes you feel like you've already done something wrong. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't have to. She just looks at you. This long, flat look, and you feel yourself shrink. I spent the first 3 years of my marriage trying to get her to look at me differently, to see me as someone who belonged in that family, not just someone her son had dragged home from a state school with no family connections and a business degree she once described, at Thanksgiving, as practical. She meant it as an insult. I filed it away as fuel. My husband Garrett is the middle son. His older brother Colt runs the family's construction business, or at least he has the title. His younger sister, Priya, is in law school and has been for what feels like a decade. Connie orbits all 3 of them with the focused intensity of someone who's never once considered that her children might not be the most important people in any given room. She never orbited me. When Garrett and I got married, I moved to Asheville, but his family has lived for 3 generations. I brought nothing with me except a laptop, a savings account nobody knew about, and a very specific set of skills I had spent 4 years building at a commercial real estate firm in Charlotte. I was good at what I did. I was quiet about it. The first property came through Garrett's uncle, who needed to offload a small apartment complex in West Asheville before his divorce finalised. He needed a fast close. I had the capital and the contacts. We structured it quietly through an LLC I set up in Delaware, and by the time anyone in the family knew a sale had happened, I had already signed the papers and begun the renovation budget. The family knew only that someone had bought the building and that the units were being upgraded. They didn't know the buyer had been sitting at their Christmas dinner table, eating Connie's dry roast and nodding along while Colt explained cryptocurrency to people who hadn't asked. That became the pattern. I found properties. I structured deals. I kept Garrett's name off everything, not to deceive him, but because he asked me to. He understood what I was doing. He was proud of me, privately, the way you can be proud of something you don't fully have the vocabulary to explain to your own family. He would squeeze my hand under the table at dinners, and that was enough for both of us. Over 6 years, I built a portfolio worth $240 million. Residential complexes, small commercial strips, 1 mixed-use development near downtown that a regional magazine called a model for sustainable urban growth. I had a property manager I trusted, a CPA who had been with me since year 2, and a real estate attorney, Nan Darnell, who could close the deal faster than anyone I'd ever worked with. My mother-in-law thought I did freelance bookkeeping from home. She mentioned it once to a friend at a garden party I was not supposed to be able to hear. Gareth's wife does something with numbers, she said. Very quiet. You know the type. I was standing 6 feet away, refilling my glass. I smiled. I let it go. I was good at letting things go. I had been doing it for years. The estate planning meeting was Connie's idea. Her husband, Gerald, had been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's the previous fall. He was functional, sharp, still himself, but the diagnosis had apparently lit a fire under Connie that no amount of reassurance could put out. She scheduled the meeting for a Saturday in March at the family house on Kimberley Road and sent calendar invitations to Colt, Priya and Garrett. She did not send one to me. Garrett mentioned it the night before. We were in the kitchen. He had his reading glasses on and was looking at the invite on his phone with a particular expression he makes when something is bothering him. But he hasn't decided yet how bothered to be. She didn't include you, he said. I know, I said. I was making coffee. I kept my back to him. It's about the trust, the properties, the business transition. I know. Wren. Garrett. I turned around. I'll come anyway. He looked at me for a long moment. Are you sure that's a good idea? I thought about the building on Lexington Avenue that his family thought belonged to a nameless LLC. I thought about the mortgage I held in my name on a commercial strip mall his brother Colt's construction company used as their primary materials depot. I thought about the quarterly distributions that had been quietly supporting Gerald's medical bills since October, routed through the family trust with no attribution. Yes, I said, I'm sure. I arrived with Garrett. Connie met us at the door and kissed him on the cheek. She looked at me the way she always did. A brief, assessing glance, the kind you give furniture you're not sure matches the room, and turned back into the house without saying my name. The dining room table had been set up with folders. Gerald's estate attorney, a man named Phil who wore bow ties and had the careful stillness of someone paid not to show surprise, was seated at the far end. Colt was already there, leaning back in his chair with the comfortable expansion of a man who assumes every room was built to him. Priya sat beside him, her law school notepad open, pen already in hand. Connie sat at the head of the table and gestured for everyone to take their seats. There were 4 folders, 4 chairs, 4 name cards, printed in Connie's handwriting. Mine was not among them. She looked at me, standing in the doorway beside Garrett, and said, Wren, honey, this is a family financial meeting. It's really just for the immediate family members who are part of the trust structure. I heard Priya shift in her seat. Garrett stiffened beside me. Wren is my wife, he said quietly. Of course she is, Connie said, and this isn't personal. Phil has advised that we keep the discussion limited to trust beneficiaries. It's a legal matter. She looked at Phil, who said nothing, which told me that wasn't exactly how he had phrased it. There's coffee in the kitchen. We shouldn't be more than 2 hours. 2 hours. She was asking me to sit in the kitchen for 2 hours while they divided up assets that included properties I owned. Properties held under my LLC. Properties on which I held the financing. I stood there for exactly 4 seconds. Then I pulled out the chair at the corner of the table, the extra one, pushed against the wall, set it next to Garrett and sat down. The room went very still. Wren, Connie said. I'll be quiet, I said. You won't even know I'm here. Colt made a sound that was almost a laugh. Priya looked down at her notepad. Garrett said nothing, but his hand found mine under the table. Phil cleared his throat and opened his folder. It went fine for about 40 minutes. Gerald's trust structure was standard. Assets distributed among the 3 children. Connie retained rights to the primary residence. The construction business would transfer to Colt, contingent on a buyout of his siblings' shares. I listened. I did not speak. I kept my face neutral even when Phil began itemizing the family's real estate holdings and listed 3 properties that were not, in any legal sense, the family's. They were mine. At the 50-minute mark, Colt leaned forward and said, What about the Lexington Strip? That's been our depot for 2 years. Is that being rolled into the business valuation? Phil looked at his papers. The Lexington Avenue property is held under an LLC, Brightline Property Holdings. It's not currently part of the family trust. Right, Colt said, but it's basically ours. We've been operating there. Who even owns that LLC? Phil looked at his papers again. He was a careful man. He said, I'd need to verify the ownership structure. I said calmly and without raising my voice, I do. The room went still again. A different kind of still. Colt turned to look at me. Sorry? Brightline Property Holdings, I said. That's my LLC. I'm the sole managing member. The Lexington property is mine. So is the Kearney Avenue complex and the mixed use on Depot Street. No one spoke. Connie's face did something complicated. Gerald looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something between surprise and what might have been respect. What are you talking about? Colt said. I built a real estate portfolio, I said. Over 6 years. I've been operating quietly because that's how I prefer to work. But since we're discussing assets that affect this family, I thought it was relevant. How much? Priya started. The portfolio is currently valued at $240 million, I said. Your construction company's primary depot is on one of my properties. The mortgage on that property is held in my name. The lease your company signed 2 years ago is with my LLC. Colt looked at Garrett. Did you know about this? Yes, Garrett said simply. And you didn't tell us. It wasn't mine to tell. Connie had not said anything. She was looking at me with that flat look, the one I had spent years trying to soften. But something was different in it now. There was something underneath the flatness that I had not seen before. Something that looked, if I was reading it correctly, a lot like recalculation. I want to be clear, I said, because I had been waiting 6 years to say something clearly, that I didn't come here to cause problems. I came because I was excluded from a meeting that directly concerns my assets. If the family's estate plan involves any property on Lexington Avenue or Kearney Avenue, you'll need my signature. Phil can confirm that. Phil, to his credit, said, That is correct. I stood up. I'll let you finish the meeting, I said. I'll be in the kitchen. I picked up my coffee and walked out. I sat at the kitchen island and looked out the window at the backyard. There was a vegetable garden Gerald had put in years ago, half dormant now in the early March cold. A ceramic rooster on the fence post that had been there as long as I'd known the family. I had always thought it was ugly. Standing there alone, I thought it had a certain dignity. My phone buzzed 3 times in 20 minutes. 2 texts from Priya which surprised me. One from Darnell. Heard anything yet? Standing by if needed. I texted back, not yet, but possibly soon. The meeting broke up in just under an hour after I left. I heard chairs scraping, Phil's careful voice wrapping things up. The particular silence of a room where no one wants to be the first to speak. Garrett came into the kitchen first. He didn't say anything. He sat on the stool beside me and put his arm around my shoulders. That was enough. Colt came in a few minutes later. He stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets and looked at me differently than he ever had. Not warmly, exactly, but without the comfortable dismissal that had always been there before. He said, I didn't know, which wasn't an apology but was something. Priya came in last, sat across from me and said, very directly, can I ask you something? Sure, I said. The quarterly payments that have been covering Dad's neurology bills, the ones routed through the trust account. Was that you? I looked at her. Yes. She pressed her lips together and nodded. She didn't say thank you, but her eyes did. Gerald did not come into the kitchen, but an hour later, when Garrett and I were getting ready to leave, he found me in the front hallway, moving slowly with his cane, and he took my hand in both of his and held it for a moment. He said, I'm sorry we didn't see you better, Wren. Wren. That was all. But Gerald had never been a man who wasted words, so those were enough. Connie did not come to find me. 3 days later, I got a call from Phil. Connie wanted to discuss renegotiating the lease terms on the Lexington property. Specifically, she wanted to know if there was any flexibility in the monthly rate, given the family connection. I thought about that long, flat look, the garden party, the way she'd said practical at Thanksgiving. I told Phil the lease terms were standard market rates and would remain so. I also told him that the current lease was set to expire in 8 months and that I hadn't yet decided whether to renew. He relayed that information. I didn't hear from Connie directly. 2 weeks after that, she called Garrett. He told me about it after. She'd been pleasant, he said, almost careful. She asked how I was doing. She said something about maybe doing lunch. He looked at me when he told me, trying to read my face. I said, that's nice, and went back to what I was reading. I didn't go to lunch. Here's what people don't understand about being underestimated for a long time. After a while, it stops feeling like an insult and starts feeling like an insult and starts feeling like infrastructure. People don't question the foundation of a building. They don't wonder who poured it. They just walk across it and think about other things. I had been the foundation of that family's financial stability for 6 years. The building had my name on the deed. The floor they were standing on was mine. I didn't need them to know it, but I needed to stop letting them act like I didn't exist. I never pulled a lease. When the 8 months were up, I renewed it, at market rate, with a standard 5% annual increase. I was fair. I am always fair. But I stopped being invisible. I hired a communications consultant and let the mixed-use development be published under my name. The regional magazine profile ran in September. Connie saw it. I know because Priya sent me a screenshot of a text thread where Connie had forwarded it to a friend with the caption, "My daughter-in-law." Not Garrett's wife. Not the bookkeeper. Not the quiet one. My daughter-in-law. It wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't a reversal. It was something smaller and more honest. A woman revising her assumptions slowly without quite admitting she'd been wrong. I could work with that. Gerald kept getting his neurology bills covered. I didn't stop that. I never considered stopping it, not because I was afraid of how it would look, but because I had decided years ago that his care was not something I would let become collateral damage in a family argument. He'd always been kind to me, quietly, in the way of men who know their wives hold the social register and don't want to create conflict. But I remembered. Kindness has a long receipt. The last thing I did that year was set up a small scholarship at the community college in Asheville, the one I would have attended if I hadn't gotten a merit scholarship to UNC. It goes to women in the business program, first-generation students, the ones who do their homework in break rooms and study on their phones during commutes, the ones nobody sees coming. The scholarship is funded through a separate foundation. The foundation's name is not mine. I specifically asked that it not be mine. But I know, and that turns out to be enough. It always has been. I've thought a lot about why I stayed quiet for so long. And the honest answer isn't patience. It isn't strategy, either. Not entirely. It was something closer to a test I was running on myself. I wanted to know how long I could build something real without needing anyone to see it. Turns out, 6 years. The thing about being underestimated is that it costs you something even when you tell yourself it doesn't. Every time Connie looked through me at a family dinner, every time Colt talked over me in a conversation I knew more about than anyone else in the room, it landed. I just didn't let it redirect me. There's a difference between being hurt and being stopped. I was hurt plenty of times. I was never stopped. What I've come to understand is that how people treat you when they think you have nothing to offer is the most honest information you'll ever get about them. Not how they treat you when you've proven yourself. Not after the magazine profile. Not after Phil confirmed my name was on the deed. Before all of that. When they thought I was just Garrett's quiet wife who did something with numbers. That was when they showed me exactly who they were. And I filed it. I didn't punish them for it immediately. I just remembered. There's a version of this story where I walk into that dining room and flip the table, where I revoke the lease on the spot and watch Colt scramble. I understand why people want that version. There's something satisfying about a fast, clean reversal, but I think fast reversals are mostly for people who need the other person to know they lost. I didn't need that. What I needed was for my own name to mean something. To me first, and then, eventually, to the record. Wren is a small bird. My grandmother named me that because she said small birds are the ones people never hear coming, but they always hear singing. I didn't understand what she meant until I was sitting in that kitchen on Kimberley Road, looking out at Gerald's garden, while the people in the next room rearranged their understanding of everything they thought they knew. The choices that brought me to that moment were mine. 4 years studying commercial real estate in Charlotte while my classmates were planning weddings, and I was reading deal structures on my lunch break. The decision to keep Garrett's name off the paperwork, not to protect myself from him, but because he was right when he said it was mine. The discipline of staying invisible long enough to build something that couldn't be ignored. None of that happened by accident. And none of it happened because the world decided to be fair to me. It happened because I decided to be rigorous when it was inconvenient, honest when it cost me something, and patient when every instinct said otherwise. Connie called me her daughter-in-law in a text she didn't know I'd see. It wasn't an apology. It was something more useful, a woman updating her information. I can respect that. People who revise themselves, even late, even reluctantly, are doing something genuinely hard. I kept Gerald's medical bills covered. I always would have, not because I needed the credit, but because decency isn't a bargaining chip. The moment you start withholding kindness to make a point, you've already lost something that matters more than the argument. The scholarship still runs. The name on the foundation isn't mine. The women who receive it don't know who funded it, and that's exactly how I want it. I know. That's enough. It always has been.